So have you ever wondered how two people can stand in front of each other, in front of God, in front of all their family and friends at a wedding ceremony, and they, pledge their love to each other till death do us part, we're going to stay together no matter what. And then a few years later, several years later, or unfortunately every now and then it happens a few months later, they just hate each other. Have you ever noticed that? It's a little strange, isn't it? You're going, no, it's not strange. That happened to me. I understand. I'm not judging. I'll explain why in a minute. But if we could all just pull ourselves out of the emotion, we've all watched it happen. It's almost become, I don't want to say normal, but you're like, okay, I get it. But if we could pull ourselves out of it and just be an independent, unbiased, unemotional third party, it is a little strange when you think about it. Here are two people who love each other so much that they commit to spend the rest of their lives with one another. I can't imagine life without you. And then you take it a few years down the road and everything's changed. They don't love each other anymore. They may still be together, but they don't love each other anymore. Matter of fact, when they hear their garage door opening, it's like they get the terrible feeling in the pit of their stomach. It's like, can I go somewhere? Is there work to do in the backyard? Where can I go to get away? The ogre is home. It's one of those deals. It's just a strange thing, isn't it? I loved you, I loved you, I loved you. We loved each other. We were so committed. We were so in love. Now we can't stand each other. In some cases, now we hate each other. It's just kind of odd. Speaking of things that are odd, and again, some of you will go, this is not odd. You've been through this, and I understand. But speaking of things that are odd, I find it a little strange sometimes, too, when I'm talking to a couple that is about to get a divorce, or maybe they did get a divorce, but oftentimes they're about to get a divorce, and I am like the last resort. And they'll come to me and go, hey, we want to talk. And I'm like, it's a little too late. But anyway, so you should have come to me a long time ago. But anyway, it's one of those deals of, hey, we're pretty much done. We want to end this relationship. And as I have the conversation with them, I always find it strange because I think to myself, and sometimes I go ahead and ask, well, all right, but do you plan on, if you end this marriage, do you plan on getting married again in the future? Do you hope that happens? And they're like, yeah, I hope that happens. Well, so you want to fall in love with somebody again? Yeah, I want to fall in love with somebody again. And there's something in me, and I don't say it because I'm smart enough not to say it out loud, but there's something in me that wants to ask them this. There's something in me that wants to go, okay, well, if you plan on going through all this trouble again of falling in love again and then getting married again, how about you just try to fall in love with each other one more time? Because you're going to do it all over again, and it happened once with this person, so maybe it could happen again. How about we just try this first, But again, I don't say that out loud, even though I'm thinking that seems like the better option than divorce, because divorce, and some of you have been through this, divorce is really complicated. Divorce is really, really painful, isn't it, for everybody impacted by it. And if you don't care about either one of those options, divorce is expensive. It's just expensive. And it just costs a lot of money, not just when you're getting the divorce, but it costs a lot of money for a long time after the divorce if there are kids involved and on and on. So there's a part of me that's just like, it'd make a lot more sense just to try to make this work with each other again. But I never say that, and the reason I don't say it is because if I did, they would look back at me and be like, you just don't get it, do you? It's not that simple. And they'd be right. It's not that simple. And I'm not judging, because it's not any more simple to do that than it is for me to do the things consistently that I want to do, and to do the things consistently that I know are in my best interest for me to do. And the same is true for you, isn't it? Why is it that you can't, and why is it that I can't always do the things that we want to do and we say we want to do and we know are in our best interest to do? And why is it that we, do things that we say I'll never do, and then why is it that we don't do things that we say I should do? What is it about us that we have such a hard time following through and doing the things that we know we should? If we could figure that out, it would solve a lot of things, including our relationship problems, wouldn't it? This is why next week, just a quick plug, this is why next week I'm starting a brand new short 2-week series called Me Versus Me. And I'm going to talk about some concepts that I've never talked about before. But I think for some of you, it may be the most helpful series that we do all year. Because we're going to talk about this idea of the internal battle and the internal tension that we all feel at times, knowing I want to do that, I should do that, I plan and intend to do that, and yet we can't follow through and do it. And then we find ourselves doing all the very things we swore we would never do. What is going on with that? In the end, I believe that we are often our own worst enemy. That if we could figure out what's going on inside of us and, resolve this battle with I want to do it, but I can't do it, me versus me deal, if we could solve that, it would solve a whole lot of other things in our lives. So we're going to talk about that starting next week for the next couple of weeks. And I just told you that because you're going to have a conversation with somebody this week, and they're going to talk about something related to that tension. Oh, I know I should, and I haven't been able to, or I said I was going to, and then I quit. You're going to have that conversation, and you should just look at them and say, we're talking about that at my church on Sunday. Why don't you come to church and sit with me? Matter of fact, I had this conversation with a guy yesterday. He was talking to me about some stuff, and I said that very thing. I said, why don't you just come to church? And I didn't say the sit with me part because that would get awkward for him. Can't really sit with me, but, why don't you just come to church? And he said, you know what? I think I'm going to. And you'd be surprised at how often, people say that when you invite them. So anyway, that's coming up next week. But today, I want to wrap up this series. And honestly, while we're wrapping this up, at the same time, it's a little bit of a preamble, if you will, or a setup for what we're going to talk about next, because in the Me versus Me series, because it's all just flows together. So if you haven't been with us for the series, we've been answering this question: is it possible for two people to stay in love, happy together forever? And the answer is we all want to. We're not sure we know how to. The answer is we all want to, but we're not sure we're actually going to be able to follow through on it. We're not sure we're actually going to be able to do it. And part of the reason this is so hard for people to do, part of the reason it's so hard to get to the end, I'm not saying, everybody ends in divorce. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying some people stay together, they're just not in love. They're just committed. We're going to do it for the kids. No, that's not what we're talking about. What we all want is to be in a relationship with somebody where we get to the end and we're more in love than we've ever been before. But part of the reason that's so difficult to do is we confuse love as a noun versus love as a verb. And all I mean by that is most of us treat love like it's a thing. It's a thing that just happens to us, or it doesn't happen to us. I fall into love, I fall out of love. Fall in love, I fall out of love. We just treat it like it's something. And love is not a thing that we have no control over. If you think you have no control over it, then it's just, did you hit the lottery or not when you married that person? But love's not a thing you have no control over. It's not a noun. Love is a verb. It's way more than a feeling. Love is a choice. It's a decision that we get to make. And so, what we've talked about throughout this series basically is, all right, well, if falling in love just requires a pulse, anybody can do that. Staying in love requires a plan. Then we've talked about what's the plan look like? What's the plan look like? What's it take? And Paul, who wrote a lot of the documents in the first century that became part of our New Testament, Paul outlined for us a very detailed plan, a plan of action of, if you develop the kind of character and capacity to love this way, then you're going to be able to stay in love, happy together forever. And so we've talked through that. Things like love is patient, love is kind, it doesn't boast, it's not proud, on and on and on. Here's the thing, though, and don't raise your hand because I'm not trying to single anybody out, but here's the thing. The reality is, if you've been tracking with us throughout this series, as we've talked about patience and kindness and selflessness and believing the best in the other person and mutual submission, how can I help, treating the other person as the most important person in the room. If you've been tracking with us through this whole series, here's the question I would have for you. Don't raise your hand, but how many of you had already heard most of the concepts that we've talked about? How many of you, whether you're at a wedding, doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not, you've been at a wedding somewhere and you've heard this, description that Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 13, you've heard that read. The reason I bring that up, most of us have already heard it. I bring it up because the reality is we need a lot more than information, don't we? The struggle is not with just knowing. We can figure out the information part. The struggle is in application. The struggle is in actually doing it. So why is it so hard for us to do the things that we should do? And let's be honest, to do the things that we actually want to do, and yet we just can't seem to follow through. What is going on with that? Well, when it comes to relationships, I think a big part of the problem, and none of us recognize this really on the front end, but this is so important to see. A big part of the problem is that when two people enter into a relationship and ultimately a marriage, they are not coming with fully healthy hearts. Two people have never entered a relationship with fully healthy hearts. What I mean by that is, when two people come into a relationship, they bring what you might call baggage with them. When they're standing there at the altar and they're pledging their love for each other, part of the reason that years down the road, the person that they love so deeply they can resent so much or hate so much, is because they didn't realize as they were both standing there at the altar that they both walked down the aisle with these invisible suitcases full of baggage. And what I mean by baggage is just, maybe it's, you grew up in a home where your dad loved you, but you never felt like you could measure up. He always made you feel like you weren't quite enough, you weren't quite good enough, you didn't quite accomplish enough, you weren't quite successful enough. And so what happens It doesn't have to, but nobody ever trains us how in the moment to deal with the consequences of that. And so what often happens is we take that and we shove it into a suitcase because we don't want to deal with it, and we just carry that baggage along with us. Or you grow up in a home where you have a mom who loves you, but she didn't always make you feel secure. And she didn't always show up when you needed her most. And it created some baggage. It caused you to start thinking, well, maybe I'm not worth that. And maybe she doesn't love me that much. And you had all that baggage. And instead, because again, nobody was there teaching you how to deal with it. So you just thought the only option I have is to throw it in this suitcase, if you will. Just, try to ignore that and just carry on. But you carried the baggage with you. Or you had an ex at some point in your past, and they cheated on you. Or they rejected you in some way, and it created some baggage. Or you had a teacher, a coach, you name it, a friend, whatever, who just said, you're not blank enough. And they treated you in such a way you didn't feel good enough, talented enough, gifted enough, whatever it may have been. And it was more baggage. You stuck it in that suitcase, if you will, and you just kept carrying that. And then you find the person that you're so deeply in love with. And oftentimes we're not even aware we've got this baggage with us, and we have no idea they have baggage. And we show up, and you end up in a relationship where you are closer to someone than you will ever be to anyone else in your life. And you know what that proximity does? It makes it so much easier for you to bump each other and for you to step on one another's baggage, for you to run into some of those things that you do a pretty good job of hiding with other people. But in a relationship this close and this intimate, you can't hide it. All of that stuff eventually comes out. And then, that's where the fireworks come, don't they? Because you say something that seems so innocent, and they have such a strong emotional response to it. And you're thinking, where did that come from? Where did that come from? And what you don't know is, that thing you said that really was so innocent, it sounded like something their dad used to say that made them feel so incompetent, or just, they couldn't measure up. And all of that emotion came back. Meanwhile, you're over here going, I don't know what happened, because you didn't know the baggage was there. And then the reverse is true. They do something, and it seems so innocent and simple to them. It was. There was no malice behind it. But it creates such strong emotion in you. And you know this. Over time, what all of that baggage does is it undermines the relationship. And the reason it undermines the relationship is because we're often unaware of what's creating the emotion in us. We don't identify the baggage as being the root cause. Instead, we assume they are the root cause of our emotion. So I blame you every time you create emotion in me. And you blame me every time I create emotion in you. And it doesn't take long, does it? For two people who at one point loved each other so deeply to begin to think the other person is all the problem. And then I dislike you because of what you keep doing to create this in me. But it's not my fault, it's your fault, because if you just stopped doing that, then I wouldn't feel this way. And we're completely unaware of this baggage that keeps being triggered. And what they're doing just seems so innocent to them. It's like, well, hey, can I help you with that? And you just blow up, and they're thinking, I just offered to help, and now we're in an argument? But to you, you heard exactly what your dad used to say. You can't do it on your own, or your mom or whoever. And so it creates all of this strong emotional response. And you're not aware, but it's undermining the relationship. And you get to the point where you realize, or come to the conclusion of, I think they're the problem. I think they're the problem. I think they're the problem. Not me. So part of the reason it's hard for two people to stay in love happy together forever is not just because we don't have a plan. The plan is important. But let's be honest, if you've tracked with us through this series and you've been trying to be more patient, you've been trying to be kinder, you tried this idea of mutual submission, okay, how can I help? How can I help? If you tried to be humble, whatever it is, you know how hard it is to do the very thing that you want to do and think is in your best interest to do. Why is it so hard? Because you don't have a fully healthy heart. There's some stuff rattling around inside of you. There's some stuff hiding inside of you that derails your attempts to be and do who and what you want to be and do. So what do you do with that? Well, there are two people that I want to show you what they each had to say in terms of advice of how to deal with the stuff going on in our hearts. They lived 900 years apart. One of them was King Solomon. King Solomon was the third king of the nation of Israel. He's well known. The other one is Jesus. Few people know about him too. They lived 900 years apart, but they each had an interesting perspective on the fact that you've got to pay attention to the baggage that you're carrying around with you that you may not even be aware you have. So let me read you what Solomon had to say first. He writes this: above all else, and I want to pause right here, and the reason why, Solomon wrote some of the world's greatest literature on wisdom. I mean, even people who aren't Christians, they take things like the Proverbs that he wrote, and they find incredible value in them. It's some of the world's greatest literature on wisdom, but he wrote it originally for the Jewish people. He wrote about purpose. He wrote about how to find peace, how to find meaning, significance in life. He wrote wisdom on relationships, on love, and on sex. He wrote wisdom on money and how to manage and steward your money well. He wrote wisdom on just about everything, which is why we should all pause when we see him write this. Because out of all the extraordinary wisdom that he wrote, Solomon is saying, okay, if you only want to grab hold of one piece of advice I've ever given, push all the rest of it aside. Above all else, above all that other stuff, pay attention and do this. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. What in the world does it mean to guard your heart? You've never had anybody tell you to guard your heart, have you? Well, maybe in a relationship they said you ought to guard your heart because you're going to get hurt, but that's not what Solomon's talking about here. Here's what he means. Solomon's saying you should pay attention to all the baggage in your heart. You should pay attention to all the stuff that you have stuffed into your suitcase and pushed to the corner where you try to ignore it. You should pay attention to the stuff that you're not actually aware of right now that's showing up in all your relationships. You should pay attention to, you should guard your heart. And when you find that stuff inside of your heart, you need to clean out that junk. Solomon, it's painful. Why should I do that? I don't want to deal with it. It makes me feel bad. Why should I do that? Solomon says you should do it because everything you say and do in your life flows out of your heart. In other words, all that stuff inside of you that you think you're hiding, and in some cases you're not even aware is there, but you think it's not a problem. All of that stuff is impacting every area of your life. You can't keep it from showing up. And that's especially true in a relationship with somebody that you are closest to. You can't keep that stuff from showing up in that relationship. But we don't want to deal with the stuff in our hearts, do we? I get it. It is difficult. It is painful. So when you're in a romantic relationship, what do all of us tend to do and opt to choose instead of guarding or dealing with the junk in our hearts? I'll tell you what we do. We monitor our partner's behavior. That's what we do. Because that is a lot easier. And quite honestly, for some of us, we don't even realize that there's another option. But if you do that and it creates this strong emotion in me, then I'm going to get you to stop doing that. And we're going to argue about it and fight about it until you stop. Because you're the problem. And if you just stop, and I wouldn't feel this emotion. Or I feel this because you won't do. And so if I can just get you to start doing that, I'm going to complain and I'm going to criticize you until you do the behavior that I want you to do. Now, why would I try to monitor our partner's behavior? Let me connect the dot for you. You do it because you're trying to get them to help you feel a certain way. In other words, whatever that baggage is inside of you, I don't know what it looks like for you. You feel unappreciated, you feel incompetent, you feel unlovable, you feel unloved, I don't know, whatever it is. You want your partner to meet that need. This is actually why we all monitor, one of the big reasons why we monitor our partner's behavior and try to control it. Because if they would just act that way, then I would feel this way, and that's what I'm really after. The problem is, they can't actually fix that problem. You see, what you're feeling has more to do with the condition of your heart than it does the behavior of your spouse. To which we all want to go, yeah, whoa, wait a minute. Let me tell you, Matt, about my spouse's behavior or my partner's behavior. And then you'll agree. Okay, I'm not saying that behavior shouldn't change. I'm not saying that. I'm just telling you this. That strong emotional response you have to it, the condition, all those emotions, what you're feeling has more to do with the condition of your heart than it does their behavior. And I'll prove it to you real quickly. That thing that they do that just drives you crazy, that thing that they do that makes you feel so unvalued, that thing that they do that creates so much anger in you. If we took you out of that relationship and we replaced you with somebody else, that very same thing might create no emotional response at all in that person. You know why? Because they have different baggage than you. So the thing that triggered you because of that thing that happened with your dad or your mom or who, that ex, whatever it was, that thing that triggers such a strong emotional response in you, if they don't have that same baggage, it won't bother them at all. And some of you, you've been divorced and remarried, and you've watched, whoever you divorced get remarried, and you kind of watch that. You've scratched your head at this, haven't you? You're like, why does that not bother them? That drove me crazy. Well, this is why. They just have different baggage. Again, I'm not saying that behavior shouldn't change. I'm just saying this. What you're feeling, what I'm feeling, it has way more to do with the condition of our own hearts than the behavior of our spouses or the behavior of our partners. So, because of that, while I may be looking to monitor our partner's behavior so that we can feel a certain way, the truth is, no matter what they do, they're never going to be able to help us feel like we want to feel enough. They're never going to be able to appreciate us enough that suddenly we don't feel unappreciated anymore. They're never going to praise us enough that suddenly we feel competent enough. They can't. Because the very thing that is creating all of those emotions in you is still in you. Still in you. And until you remove that baggage, you're always going to struggle with that issue. Now, 900 years later, Jesus is talking about this very same concept and this very same idea. But he makes it even more personal. Here's what he said. But the things that come out of a person's mouth, in other words, the things that we say, come from the heart. And these, this is strong, defile them. Defile them. What do you mean, Jesus? He's saying, well, everything you say and do is a reflection of what's going on inside of you. Everything that you say and do is a reflection of what is going on inside of you. It's a reflection of what's in your heart. So what do you and I do? Now, we intuitively know this. So what do we try to do? Well, when we realize how personal this is, then not only do we try to monitor our partner's behavior, but we start monitoring our own behavior, don't we? And we've all tried to get really good at this. I'm going to monitor my own heart. It's like we put a filter over our heart because there are some things we feel that we know I should not express this feeling because it's going to create problems. I shouldn't express this feeling because I don't want the people around me to know I feel this way. So I'm going to hide this so that they think I'm this way even though I'm actually this way. I'm not going to say this. All of us have done this. I've got a filter. I'm not going to say that because if I say that, it's going to create some real problems, and I don't want them to think I'm the kind of person that would say that kind of thing. We all have a tendency to try to monitor or filter our own hearts and our own behaviors, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that, except, and you know this from experience, except eventually your filter starts leaking, doesn't it? Eventually your filter gets a hole in it. You get stressed, or you get, had a few too many to drink, or, whatever it is, whatever your trigger is, eventually your filter develops a hole in it. And you know who it tends to develop a hole with and start leaking on first? The people you love the most and you're closest to. You can do a pretty good job of filtering what you say and do at work. You can do a pretty good job of filtering what you say and do when you're around a neighbor or around the people out at the game or the ball field or whatever. But when you're around the people that are closest to you so much that your filter starts leaking and stuff starts coming out of you and you start saying and doing things that you're not even always proud of. But when you do what I do. Your first reaction is to go, well, if they hadn't, then that wouldn't have come out of me. If they hadn't, then, so I think it's their fault, and I think it's their fault, and I think it's their fault. If I could just change the who's around me so they quit bringing that out of me, then I would be better. And this is Jesus' point. No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. Because it's an internal problem. I can say it this way. What's in you will come out of you regardless of who's with you. Eventually, what's in you is going to come out of you regardless of who's with you. And when it comes to romantic relationships, that just means this. And some of you've learned this. It just means you can change out the date all you want. You can change out the marriage partner all you want. You can move in, move out, move in, move out as many times as you want. I mean, it can be a carousel of people in and out of your life. It doesn't matter. Eventually, what's in you is going to come out of you regardless of who's with you, because the who's not actually the problem. The who's not the one that's creating the response. I'm not saying the who's behavior should not change. I'm just saying the reason the thing is coming out of you when they do that or say that is because that thing is inside of you. If it wasn't in you, it would never come out of you. And so you can continue to change names and faces, names and faces, names and faces. Or you can do the hard work of addressing the baggage that you carry in your heart. And I can do the hard work of addressing the baggage I carry in my heart, so that we can be people who have a healthy heart, so that we can be people that the stuff that comes out of our hearts, it's the stuff that we're proud of and we want to be known for. Which leads to the question, well, how do you do that? Because nobody ever teaches us how to deal with what's going on in our hearts. Nobody ever teaches us how to clean up the mess in there. Nobody ever teaches us how to, unzip the suitcase and pull it all out and address it all. So what do you do? What do you do? Starting next week in this Me versus Me series, we're going to get to the very heart of this, but I want to give you two things to think about this week. Two simple things, simple to understand. Honestly, it's demanding to actually practice, but simple to understand. The first thing is this. You need to pause and pay attention long enough to be able to identify exactly what you're carrying around in your suitcase. In other words, what's your baggage? You need to pause and identify why you feel the emotion you feel and what the root emotion is that's causing such a strong emotional response in you anytime they say that, anytime they do that. That's step one. Now, this is really hard for us guys because you know how wide our emotional spectrum is as guys? Most of us, it's like that. What are you feeling? I'm angry. What else? There is nothing else. I'm angry, It's that simple. I was at an event once where they gave us this big circular, it was just a huge concentric circle. And it was full of, it had like 150 different emotions on it. And they said, we want you to identify 5. And I was like, this is such a waste of time. Just find the angry one, and that's all I got to do, or frustrated. When I don't want to say I'm angry, I'm frustrated. I was like, what in the world? But the reality is there is a world out there that some of us don't know exists. So you got to figure out what that is. Now, let me just give you some ideas, okay? Let me help you out a little bit. For instance, angry is one, but what about abandoned? For some of you, if you got right down to the root cause, the reason you respond so emotionally is because there was a time in your past, an experience you had, where you felt abandoned by someone who should have been there for you, who should have taken care of you, who should have loved you through it all, and they didn't show up. And you know what happens? Now you're with somebody else, and they do something that is so innocent. They have no malice behind it. But it reminds you of something that happened back here, something that was said, something that was done, and those feelings of abandonment come right up. And you respond so strongly. And you may not even be aware enough to go, oh, I'm feeling abandoned again. You just know, no, nobody's ever doing that to me, and you're furious. Embarrassed, disrespected, unappreciated. Because again, this happened in your past. You always felt taken advantage of. You never felt appreciated for what you did. Now you're in this relationship. And you do something for that person, and they come home, and they haven't noticed and thanked you within 30 seconds. And sparks start flying. You're so angry, and you're like, I knew you didn't. And they're going, whoa, I didn't even have time to catch my breath. But again, it wasn't that they didn't appreciate you, but it feels that way because of what happened here. Here are some other options. Unattractive, unlovable, unimportant, incompetent. You had somebody back here, your dad just always made you feel incompetent. No matter what you did, it wasn't good enough. He told you, you'll never be able to figure that out. You just got the message, you just weren't competent. And now you're over here and you're doing great, but they make a simple comment like, hey, do you want some help with that? And you just lose it. And they're going, are you kidding? We're fighting over the fact I just offered to help, But again, it's because you're carrying around this feeling of incompetence in your suitcase. You may not even know it's there. Here are a few others. Scared, insecure, lonely, betrayed, jealous. So if you grew up in a scenario or a situation where you were always being compared to someone and you're always on the losing end of the comparison. then it doesn't take much to trigger all that jealousy in you again, does it? But you don't feel that. That's not what you actually identify. You just feel like you're being mistreated. But in reality, it's just bringing a lot of that up. So you got to figure out how to identify what is the emotion I'm really feeling. Start tracing it back. Why am I so upset and angry about this? Get to the root of the problem. What's in me that's coming out of my mouth. I heard what just came out of my mouth, but that's not actually the root problem. Jesus said it's what's in me that's going to come out in what I say. So let me go all the way back to the beginning that's creating this whole problem. Now, at that point, this is where there's a fork in the road and people go two different ways, okay? And I just want to acknowledge that because there are people who are not followers of Jesus who will not take one path, they will take another, and even some people who are followers of Jesus who are going to take a path. And what is often, and I'm not saying this is bad advice or isn't valuable, but what's often told people at this point is, okay, once you know what's really causing this strong emotional response in you, now what we want to do is we want to help you manage that. In other words, we want to give you some techniques to be able to navigate your way through that and better monitor your own behavior. We want to help you when you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling stressed, when you're feeling abandoned. We want to give you some techniques that are going to help you to manage those emotions until they pass. And again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Here's the only problem with that approach long term. Okay, it's great in the short term. The problem in the long term is that's like having a huge pile of trash sitting in the middle of your house and somebody telling you, don't take the trash out, let's just manage the smell. Let's just make it so you don't smell that, and eventually you won't pay attention to it, and then when people visit you at your house, you just keep that hidden in the closet, and then as long as you're managing the smell, they won't know it's there. Well, that sounds a little ridiculous, doesn't it? What you really want to do, I mean, it's great, you got to start by managing the smell, but what you actually want to do is get the trash out of your house entirely. And this is where I think the value of Jesus comes in. See, this is why Jesus said, if you'll follow me, it'll make your life better and make you better at life. Because he can do something for us. He offers us a path or an option that no one else can offer. And that is, he says, I'm going to help you remove all the trash. All that baggage you've got inside, let's go ahead and open up that suitcase. You got to look at it. It's painful, I know, but you got to look at it. It's uncomfortable, I know, but we got to address it. But we're not just going to manage it and zip the suitcase back up. No. Jesus says, I'm going to go through all of this with you. And we're going to clean all of this junk out of your heart. I'm going to go through all of this with you. And we're going to remove it over time so that there's nothing there to respond to anymore. It's not impacting you anymore. It's a part of your past, but it doesn't define you. It just reminds you of what happened at one point. So we're going to deal with it. Now, here's the thing about Jesus that I find fascinating. In spite of the fact that he loves you and me as much as he loves you and me, he will not force his way into addressing and working on all of that stuff with you because he values your freedom. So Jesus, this is important, Jesus is waiting on your invitation and your cooperation to deal with whatever baggage you're carrying around. He is waiting on your invitation and your cooperation to address the mess in your heart and in mine. If you'll go so far as to simply invite him in and choose to cooperate, over time, he'll clean it up with you. But if you don't, he's not going to force his way in because he loves you too much to impinge on your right to choose. So you get to decide. You're going, well, Matt, that seems a little much. Like, why do you think Jesus is the only one who can help clean all that up? I'll tell you why. Because he is the only one who can offer you and me perfect, unconditional love. Now think about this. You may be with someone who loves you very, very deeply. I love Jen more than anybody in the world. I cannot offer her perfect love because I'm not perfect. So there are times where I mess up. There are times where she messes up. The only way to clean up the mess inside of you and the mess inside of me is for that mess to encounter perfect, unconditional love. And the reason I say that is because once you experience and embrace God's perfect, unconditional love for you, it solves whatever the baggage is. You feel incompetent because of this happened and this happened and this person, that's fine. But suddenly, you come face to face with a God who loves you unconditionally and perfectly and says, no, you're not incompetent. I gifted you just the way you are. You're competent. You're fine because you're mine. And you don't have to listen to what other voices have said to you anymore, because the voice that trumps all voices has just told you where you are and who you are. You feel unappreciated. You feel unloved. And suddenly you encounter a perfect unconditional love that loves you in spite of who you are, loves you in spite of all the mess inside of you. And he goes, no. You don't feel worthy? You don't feel valuable? Are you kidding? I gave my life for you so I could have this relationship with you. You're fine because you're mine. When you begin to encounter that perfect unconditional love and listen to that voice, it negates the power and the influence of these other voices. Now you get to choose, who am I going to listen to? Am I going to listen to what they said or what he says? And as you learn to cooperate and listen more to his voice and give it priority and weight over all the other voices, then everything begins to change. These voices don't have as much power in your life anymore. Because the one who matters most, the one who loves you perfectly, has already spoken the truth about you. That's why I think he is the only one who can walk into your heart, who can walk into the house and look at the pile of trash and go, okay, we can get this out of here together. If you'll just invite me in, if you'll just pay attention to what's going on inside of you. And then you'll cooperate and stay in step with me as we deal with your baggage, with your mess, one piece at a time. You want to stay in love, happy together forever? The secret of it is to learn to love that person the way Jesus loves you. And when you experience that kind of love, then you can pass on that kind of love to that person that matters most to you. And you can become the kind of person then who, like Jesus, has the character and capacity to love by being patient and to know that love is kind. It doesn't boast. It's not proud. It's not envious. It's not jealous. It keeps no record of wrongs. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. You can have the kind of love that doesn't delight in evil but rejoices in the truth. It doesn't smuggle bad things into a relationship. You can be the kind of person who loves in such a way that you believe the best. You can be the kind of person who has a love that never fails. But it's because you have experienced a love that's never failed. And it's because you've allowed Jesus to develop in you a heart that's healthy enough to love that way. That is the secret to staying in love. And that is the invitation that he offers to you and to me. And that is what enables us to do what we should do, to do what we know is in our best interest to do what we wish we could do consistently. He says, I'm here to help if you'll take me up on the offer. So this week, we pay attention, but then this week, will you invite Jesus and then cooperate with him as together you begin to address the mess, and I begin to address the mess that's inside of all of us. Let me pray for us. Father, would you help us to have the humility to acknowledge, hey, there's some stuff going on in us, and we can monitor our behavior. We tend to get pretty good at that, but it still comes out every now and then. So help us to have enough humility just to admit, I can't fix this on my own. I can hide it. I can control it to some extent, but I can't fix it. To get the baggage out of our hearts, to get the trash out of our house, we need your help. And so whether we've never made a choice to follow you or whether we've been following you for a while, but we've just hidden the baggage and said, no, let's not touch that. God, in this moment, we just want to look at you and say, okay, we're inviting you in. We're inviting you in to point out some of the things that we're probably not even aware of. We're inviting you in to remind us of things that are there because those things, whether we're aware of them or not, are going to undermine the relationship we have with the person that we love and care about most. So we invite you to come and to help us pay attention to that. But more importantly, we're choosing to cooperate with you, to begin to follow you, to begin to work with you. As difficult as it may be, as painful and uncomfortable as it may be at times, we want to cooperate in cleaning out and addressing the mess in our hearts. So thanks for being willing to do that. And thanks for your perfect, unconditional love you show us in the midst of it all. And it is in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.